This is a Relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Welcome to this episode of Real Talk. In just 30 seconds or so, Charles Adler, as this is the first episode of the week. He joins us the first episode of every week. Sometimes we'll talk politics in our region, our home province of Alberta. Sometimes we'll talk about stories across the country, and sometimes we'll focus on international stories. That's the case with our lead today, the alleged murder of longtime Putin opponent, perhaps his most outspoken critic, Alexei Navalny. It was 2 days after Valentine's Day on February 16th when the prison where he had been held captive, you may have heard about this, a prison in the Arctic Circle. An announcement came there that the 47-year-old had been found dead. Now, of course, the world had watched this saga for a number of years as he had been detained, arrested many times, poisoned, allegedly. He had gone missing for 3 months, missing from prison back in December, just a few months ago. So obviously the awareness was there that someone who was such a prominent critic of Vladimir Putin could ultimately meet the end that so many have before. This is present day. This is happening in front of the world's eyes. So what should be the world's response? We'll ask Charles Adler why this story matters to Canadians, or at least why it should, coming right up. This episode of Real Talk is presented by Rello. The reminder to those of you tuning in right now that are dreaming about a new career, sick of what you're doing now, you love the idea of leaving cubicle life behind for good, stepping into a situation with unlimited earning potential. Have you considered a career in real estate? You can get started today by enrolling with Alberta's top real estate school. That's Rello, R-E-L-O. They'll support you every step of the way, from studying for your licensing exam to getting that license and then beyond. Plus, with Rello, you can study 100% online, which means it's bound to work with your schedule, no matter what your schedule looks like. Right now, an amazing offer for Real Talkers. You can save 20%, knock 20% right off the cost of any Rello course with the code REALTALK. That's promo code, all one word, REALTALK, when you get started today at rello.ca. Legendary talk radio host, Emmy Award winner Charles Adler joins us the first episode of every week. No different this week as we say hello on the heels of the Family Day long weekend. Nice to see you, Chuck. The passing, I can't right now automatically call it the murder of Alexei Navalny. Of course, his body's not yet even been released. I'm not sure how many people have faith in the process, but his death, I think a lot of people feared that this was an inevitability. And there you have it, February 16th.
Yeah, whether you call it a murder or not, I mean, sometimes in the journalism world, you're not allowed to say that something is a murder unless someone has been convicted of murder. But whether you call it that or not, it's obvious that Putin wanted to rub this guy out. And you don't try to poison someone years ago. You don't send them to the Arctic Circle. You don't send them to the Gulag because you wish them well. And after he dies, and hundreds of people want to lay flowers in the streets of Moscow in a very special spot to honor the late Alexei Navalny, the late freedom fighter, when hundreds of people want to lay flowers and they get arrested and they get thrown into police wagons. I mean, it's you don't have to be an expert on dictatorship, an expert on authoritarianism to know that this guy Navalny was a bulwark against authoritarianism, and in the end, he martyred himself. I don't know how to be an Alexei Navalny. I don't know how to have that courage. I don't know how to take those kinds of risks. He could have stayed overseas, anywhere in the world. He could have stayed in the United States, Canada, Germany, you name it. He was welcome everywhere where freedom reigns supreme. And he chose to go back to Russia because he was feeling that if he's asking Russians to get into the streets, if he's asking Russians to get active about overthrowing Vladimir Putin, it would be disingenuous and beyond that dishonest and maybe ethically bankrupt for him to not live in Russia. Everyone knew that this was the least safe place for him, but he did it anyway. Anyone who worships freedom. I'm talking about real freedom, not some right-wing talking point about vaccines, but real political freedom, real personal freedom. Yesterday we had Family Day, where people felt free to do whatever they wanted, go anywhere they wanted, anywhere in Alberta, anywhere in Canada, anywhere in the world with their families. That wasn't possible for Alexei Navalny's family. That wasn't possible for many, many other families. What blows my socks off is the story, Ryan, I don't know if you saw it, a Canadian family who, in the grips of homophobia in this country, decided to go to Russia because they were guaranteed that in Russia, no one would force their children to be gay, which is something they believed. They're living in Western Canada. So 2 parents, 8 kids, their entire life savings have been wiped out within weeks of this experiment. They really had no idea that while Russia may be anti-gay and maybe that appeals to them, Russia is also anti-freedom, and Russia is very pro fleecing them of all their money. So while their ideas were intellectually bankrupt, now they are bankrupt. They are talking to media about their bankruptcy, and because they're actually talking about what has happened to them, they're now being forcibly confined to live in Russia. They are now in the same prison, as it were, that Alexei Navalny was in. They're not up in the Arctic Circle, they're not up in the Gulag, but they're in what you have to call a political gulag at this moment. This is a Canadian family.
Okay. I mean, the beauty of a show like this, you and I can swerve all over wherever we want and talk about it, whatever we want. And so I'm just like Googling this as you're talking about it. This is the first I've heard of this. Now, the interesting thing is that this story, Johnny, feel free to show my screen as I'm doing this Google search. It's not even like on any legit. I'm not saying the story's not legit, but no legit news outlet is carrying this story, or at least discussing it right now. I don't know, maybe just because it seems so ridiculous, or maybe because
I was all over this on my podcast last week. They're a real Canadian family. They speak real English.
Okay,
they think of themselves as. I'm sorry.
I said, I see. Okay, real English.
They think of them. Yeah. They're the real thing. They're from Western Canada. They're very, very strict evangelical Christians. They believe, like a lot of people do in this country, in the United States, elsewhere, that the education system, that our political system is stacked against them and wants to make their kids gay. They're paranoid about it, and they heard from several reliable sources that Russia may be a lot of things, but it's not pro-gay, and everyone knows that, and that official homophobia in Russia appealed to them.
Wow. Yeah, this is the Feenstra family. Arend Feenstra is the dad, Anissa, his wife. And look at this. We didn't feel safe for our children in Canada in the future anymore. A lot of, as you said, this is a quote, as apparently, I mean, he apparently told Russian media this, quote, there's a lot of left-wing ideology, LGBTQ, trans, just a lot of things we don't agree with that they teach there now, and we wanted to get away from that for our children. So they took their kids to Russia. Okay. Well, I didn't expect to talk about this, and I'm just trying to decide if I want to keep it classy or like.
I saw the story as well.
It feels more like
Ryan. I could go to another ripple on this, and that's Jon Stewart, who I think you think of as a credible person, and Jon Stewart on the Daily Show last night was saying he's back on the Daily Show once a week on Mondays, kind of like being a guest on your show first Monday of every month. He's the guy on the first Monday every week on the Daily Show. Anyway, Jon Stewart was talking about the difference between Putin and those people who are in the States, in Canada, and elsewhere who are loving Putin. And from his point of view, in the old days, the Cold War was all about communism versus capitalism, and he thinks there's a new Cold War. Let's call it wokeism. He calls it wokeism versus anti-wokeism. And Putin is a hero to a lot of people who are very anti-woke, and he ties that to Tucker Carlson being in Russia last week, fawning all over the fact that Russian groceries are really cheap, a lot cheaper than they are in the States, of course, omitting the fact that people in Russia make a sliver of what people do in America. So yes, in all countries, In all countries where people make nearly no money, groceries are cheaper than they are in countries where people are making middle-class incomes.
Yeah. I mean, this is just for those that are watching on YouTube. We have a photo of this family here, the Feenstra family. I feel terrible for the kids. Obviously, this is we talk in political terms of low information voters. This is a guy I think that probably is making low information decisions. He and his wife, but you feel for the kids that moved to Russia, found themselves surprised in the reading I've done in the last 45 seconds that their bank accounts were frozen.
That's what I was going to bring
The
up.
Russians deemed their activities to be suspicious. Even the Russians can't figure out what the fuck these guys are doing.
Yeah, apparently they took a lot of their income and put it into a Russian bank, and then it was flagged because it was so much money coming from overseas into a bank, and so now they've got no dough.
Yeah, but Justin, rightfully cynical in our chat as well, talking about Russian propaganda. But geez, I don't even. I mean, this is just like kind of a wake up call, I guess. This brings it back to the central theme that you're obviously making, which is that there's a lot of people around the world that don't take the threat of Vladimir Putin seriously, and it didn't happen with his war in Ukraine, right? It didn't happen with this.
Brian, I get email, I get all kinds of contacts from people who ordinarily, because in the old days I could have called them all morons and loons. That's not fair, and that's not true. Many people who are ordinarily, they're living everywhere, including Alberta. Ordinarily, they're totally straightforward, knowledgeable, reason-based people, but they fall in love with certain ideologies. Because as I've said a gazillion times, ideology poisons everything. And so you've got people who are poisoned by this idea that Putin is a good guy because Putin represents an ideology, call it anti-woke, call it anti-gay, call it white nationalism. In Putin's Russia, leadership is almost all white. It's almost all white male. I don't have to go on and on. We've got an intelligent audience here. There is an audience of people in the Western world, which includes Canada, that thinks that's the good old days. That's MAGA, if you will. And so it's not surprising that many MAGA people, whether you want to call them MAGA or Maple MAGA, Canadian fans of MAGA, support someone like Vladimir Putin because they try not to look at all the other stuff. And because they end up supporting Putin, they also end up supporting Putin's propaganda. And the number one piece that we focus on in this part of the world is the propaganda that Putin didn't really invade Ukraine. He's liberating Ukraine from Nazism. Now, you're talking to a child of the Cold War here. So, I lived in the country right next door to Ukraine. And when the Russian tanks came in and slaughtered many of my friends and neighbors in the streets of Budapest, the capital of Hungary, they didn't say that they were slaughtering Hungarians. They didn't say that they were putting down an uprising for freedom. They said they were liberating Hungary from fascists, liberating Hungary from Nazis. So the Putin's people, whether they're called Soviets, Russians, it doesn't matter. The Putin philosophy for years has been just tell people we're not crushing anything. We're not crushing human rights. We're not crushing people. We're liberating them from fascism, liberating them from Nazism.
Right on the heels of news of Navalny's death, Tucker Carlson finds himself at the World Government Summit doing an interview. And, of course, everybody wanted to know about his recent interview with Vladimir Putin and how he was processing it, being at the Kremlin and talking to this guy when, this happens, this alleged murder, or let me say this high-profile death, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, immediately after. And if you haven't heard it yet, Tucker Carlson's response may blow your mind and it may not. Here's what he said.
I'll use the devil's advocate.
But advocate away.
Yes. Okay, I'll tell you. You should challenge in the rules of an interview, and you're a master in your business. It's not for me to give you a lecture about that, but you should challenge some ideas. For instance, you didn't talk about freedom of speech in Russia. You did not talk about Navalny, about assassinations, about restrictions on opposition in the coming elections.
I didn't talk about the things that every other American media outlet talks about
Why?
exclusively.
Yes, this is
because
my
those are
question.
covered, and because I have spent my life talking to people who run countries in various countries and have concluded the following, that every leader kills people, including my leader. Every leader kills people. Some kill more than others. Leadership requires killing people, sorry. That's why I wouldn't want to be a leader. That press restriction is universal in the United States. I know because I've lived it. Ask my former, I've had a lot of jobs. And I've done this for 34 years, and I know how it works. And there's more censorship in Russia than there is in the United States, but there's a great deal in the United States. And so, at a certain point, it's like people can decide whether they think, what countries they think are better, what systems they think are better. I just want to know what he thinks. That was the whole point.
So, basically everybody kills people. Leaders kill people.
Yeah, Trump said the same thing a number of years ago when he was asked about Putin. He said, yeah, he kills people. Everyone, we do the same thing. Here's a simple thing that everyone can understand, especially I'm talking in Alberta right now, which is a province that absolutely depends on the export of energy. It's the energy capital of Canada, and Alberta exports energy to the world. Russia's number one export is not wheat. It's not natural gas. It's not oil. It's not any of the various minerals that Russia is wealthy with. Russia is a wealth. If Russia was run by a Canadian style, a British style, an American style government, Russia would be one of the wealthiest countries in the world per capita, okay, because they are absolutely rich in resources. But Russia's number one export isn't a resource, isn't a natural resource. It's a human resource. Tens of millions of Russians have left Russia just in the last 25 years since Putin has been running the joint. And Russia exports people every day. One of the fortunate things about this unfortunate dictatorship is they still allow people, other than Navalny, but they allow many people to leave Russia. So all you have to ask yourself, if you're following the Tucker Carlson morally neutral, everybody does it routine, is how many Russians have gone to live in the United States in the last 25 years? And how many Americans have gone to live in Russia in the last 25 years? I've said this before on this show. If you can reduce things to mathematics, if you can get to the math, you can get to the truth. But if you avoid the math, you're avoiding the truth. So no, Russia and the United States are not the same when it comes to freedom of the press and freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Russia are not the same when it comes to freedom of opportunity. Russia is not a land of opportunity except for a handful of oligarchs, a handful of billionaires. Russia is not a land of opportunity for the average Russian. America and Canada are. I get that we have problems. I get that some people want to call Trudeau a dictator and they want to call Biden a dictator. I get the politics, but I also get the mathematics of coffins, okay? Russia builds a lot of coffins, more coffins per capita than most countries in the world. Most people in Russia die before they hit the age of 60. There's a reason for that. And when it comes to exports, Russia exports human beings like nobody's business. We don't. America doesn't. Not like the Russians do. I can't make it any simpler.
There's obviously a lot of, world leaders, I saw in Lithuania, in other words, calling for meaningful sanctions from the West towards Russia. And you kind of wonder ultimately how and when this ramps up and ultimately where this goes. You've got an American election coming up, and I want to pick your brain on what that really... By the way, before we go any further, I wanted to note that was Egyptian journalist Imad Eldin Adib that was interviewing Tucker Carlson at the World Government Summit. I wanted to note that interview and the source of it. But we'll talk here about the implications of the American election in November. It's looking like shaping up like it's going to be a rematch, Biden v. Trump, and a really interesting interview with Jen Psaki. Obviously, everybody around the White House knows her, has done a lot of work with Joe Biden, obviously on the press side of things now, hosting a highly rated show. She sits down with John Bolton, who's Donald Trump's former national security advisor. So consider the source. And here's what he tells her over the weekend of what a Trump presidency looks like, how it lands with the Kremlin. We'll get your take on this, Chuck, in just a second.
You start with Trump saying that Russia can do whatever they want as it relates to NATO countries. It continued with a complete standstill on aid to Ukraine, something they desperately need given the progress Russia's made even over the weekend. It ended, of course, with the death of Alexei Navalny. And you've sat in a lot of these rooms, many of them. I just wanted to ask you sort of, how does he consume what's happening here in the United States? Trump's words, or lack of words, I should say, in some cases?
Well, I think he sees things moving in his direction. And he really outdid himself in terms of disinformation a couple of days ago by a reporter asked, well, what do you think of Biden versus Trump? And he said, well, Biden's predictable and so on, implying he was endorsing
What did you
Biden.
make of that when you heard that?
It's a clear disinformation effort to
confuse people,
to give Trump the opportunity, which he was foolish enough to take, to say, well, I thought that was actually a compliment to me. I mean, if Trump is elected, there'll be celebrations in the Kremlin. There's no doubt about it, because Putin thinks that he is an easy mark.
That's Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, Chuck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Bolton knows Trump, but Bolton has been in the room with Trump.
And he's obviously not trying to get the job again.
No, he's not trying to get a job again. He doesn't need the job. He made a lot of money on his book, makes a lot of money lecturing. He's an arch conservative, the right-wing conservative, has been for years. Nobody doubts it. Nobody is calling John Bolton a woke guy, a liberal guy. He just knows Trump. I mean, one of the things that needs to be said every now and then, I guess, especially now that we're in the presidential election year, is many conservatives don't like Donald Trump. Ask Karl Rove whether he likes Donald Trump. And I'm not here to blow sunshine of Karl Rove's keister. But the thing is, many conservatives don't like him. Will they end up at the end of the day voting for him, or at least not voting for the Democrats? Yeah. But to basically suggest that all conservatives are with Donald Trump or all Republicans are with Donald Trump, that's simply not true. And yes, every day that Donald Trump does well is a good day for Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it's just like at the end of the day, though, for you to say, like, yeah, there's lots of conservatives, and you're not wrong. You're 100% correct. There's a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans, essentially, that don't like Trump, but like at the end of the day, they'll vote for him. It's like then none of this really even matters. It's like none of the criticism even matters. If they're trying to sway the nomination, maybe, but like it's not happening. I'm not trying to be a pessimist. I'm being a realist. So you already know the course is plotted.
Yeah, the course is plotted. I mean, as I've said, about ridings in Canada, we talk about 300 plus ridings in a national election, but the truth is the Conservatives know this, the Liberals know this, the NDP knows this, and most members of the media know there are about 30 to 40, if you really want to stretch it, battlegrounds in Canada. Most people, we know how they're going to vote. You can look at, once again, Alberta. I mean, you can go down the line. How many seats in Alberta, federal seats, are really up for grabs?
Like
90% of them. Okay, there you go. So, and it's the same in the states. How many states are really up for grabs? How many districts are really up for grabs? And the reason that happens is because most people who have voted conservative or Republican for their entire lives will continue to vote that way, no matter who is at the top of the ticket. It doesn't matter whether the guy's name is Donald Trump or Donald Toaster. And by the way, you look at the polls today, and I realize that some people think that there's a Poilievre mania. There is no Poilievre mania. There is a mood for change. And it wouldn't matter. I mean, Aaron O'Toole could be at the top for the Conservatives right now and get pretty much the same polls. It could be Aaron O'Toole.
I disagree.
Well, go ahead. Disagree.
Yeah, I disagree. There is something. I don't want to. I hesitate to invoke Poilievre mania. In the context of Beatlemania, though, to be fair, Trudeau got the tag. The Canadian media talked about Trudeau-mania in the 70s and again in, in the early 2010s into 2015. But I just think that Poilievre has a certain charisma, and he has a strategy and a game plan that's landing much differently than Andrew Scheer had, than Aaron O'Toole had. And it's just obvious. It's obvious in membership sales. It's obvious in fundraising. It's obvious in the media production that his own team is putting out. It's obvious in his snarkiness. Like Andrew Scheer kind of tried to be snarky, but couldn't pull it off because he has those cherub cheeks and nobody could quite take him seriously. You know, he was the guy that like he would have a biting line, but you'd be like someone scripted it in a back room and it didn't ever land kind of how it was supposed to. And then everybody knew that Aaron O'Toole was a reasonable and nice guy. And Aaron O'Toole's pretty well respected, I think, across the political spectrum for the most part, at least based on what I can tell. But then Poilievre comes in and respectfully, like, he's not afraid to be an asshole. And he's not afraid to throw bombs and punch Trudeau in the nose. And it's working. And so
I get it. But do you think, I mean, in general, you look at Canadian history, and when someone has been in power for a decade, they're generally thrown out on their asses. Yeah. That's generally what happens, no matter what people, feel about a particular prime minister. Just the way, Canadians play the game. We play 3 periods. We don't play 4 periods. We play maybe a little bit of overtime, but we're basically a 3-period country. And Trudeau's had his 3 periods. Now, he may or may not win again. Obviously, it's mathematically possible. But if it doesn't happen, it'll be said again that a political party did about a decade in power, and then Canadians wanted to change. On the margins, is Poilievre worth a few more seats than Aaron O'Toole? I'll be happy to hand you that. But if you're telling me that Poilievre is the reason that there is a mood for change in the country, that I would have to dispute.
Yeah, no, and I don't think that Pierre Poilievre is helping people or bringing people to understand that they're having a hard time making their mortgage payments or buying groceries or covering their utilities bills that have doubled. But I think that and it's not necessarily an insult, relatively speaking, to call a politician opportunistic. We call it populism, but politicians understand how to identify and then grab hold of public sentiment and then manipulate and maximize public sentiment and turn it into votes and ultimately turn it into government status and then job security. And so that's what I think Pierre Poilievre is going to do, or at least he's trying to do. Long time, relatively speaking, between now and the next election, but the polls are indicating. The polls are forecasting a bloodbath. Like, they're forecasting the Liberals are going to lose like well over 100 seats, which would be wild to watch.
Right, and that may or may not happen because polls this far out are generally not very accurate. However, I think if the roles were reversed, if Poilievre was in power for the last 10 years, then any Liberal coming along, no matter what their name, no matter what people may think of them, any Liberal coming along would run a similar campaign. It might not be exactly the same in terms of how it looks on video, might not be the same on social media. The guy, woman, man, whatever, might not try to be an asshole, as you say. However, they'd be running the same campaign. They'd say, Canada is less affordable than it should be. It's less affordable than it used to be. How do you feel about that, Mr., Mrs., Ms. Canadian? Are you better off today than you were 10 years ago? No. Well, then, it's time for change. I mean, I don't mean to be simplistic about it, but that stuff works. And the idea that the average Canadian is paying attention to all of the Poilievre videos, I don't think so. I think the average Canadian is paying attention to the price of groceries and the price of rent and the price of mortgages. And that's what's working. On the margins, I agree with you. Poilievre's able to raise more money, more awareness, control the conversation, et cetera, and that may be worth an extra 20 seats to the Conservatives, but I don't think it's the difference between staying in opposition or moving into government.
Well, yeah, there's an interesting Globe and Mail piece. I want to talk to you about this when we come back. We're going to press pause for a quick second so you can top up your coffee or your chocolate milk or whatever you're crushing today, Chuck. A Globe piece that sort of takes aim at Trudeau and his style of governance, or the tone that he's set. In particular, his invoking the word unacceptable again and again and again. I had a buddy pull me aside. We were down in Calgary on the road over the weekend for the Family Day weekend. A guy pulls me aside, moderately aware politically, very savvy as an entrepreneur and a business person. And he said, I just think, and he's probably not wrong, he said in times like this, when times are tight for everybody and everybody's sort of trying to stretch their dollars as much as they can, they don't care so much about the politicians' commitment to the so-called social stuff. And I thought, oh, this is something I'll put in front of Adler. Because if you look at what Trudeau's tried to do over the course of his years in government, coming at 9 years or so right now, a lot of it has been the quote-unquote social stuff. And virtually none of Poilievre's stuff is the quote-unquote social stuff, right? It's more the bottom line stuff. And you wonder politically, obviously it's a strategy. You wonder what's going to land most loudly with Canadians. We'll get to that with Charles Adler coming up in just a bit. Plus, I'm curious to pick his brain on what he thinks about a proposal that the Alberta NDP divorce from its federal party. And I think we'll have a big announcement that we'll share, John, when we come back from this break as well. I'd like to put that in front of Charles.
Yeah.
Maybe he can help us do our homework. We got a big show coming up this week, and so we're going to make an announcement on the other side of this break. In just a second, you've probably been paying attention. Have you seen this news about strike action in Edmonton? This is CSU 52. The union is urging Edmontonians to reach out to your councillor, your mayor, to implore them to head back to the bargaining table and avoid a work stoppage. If there is a work stoppage, if this thing goes down, who are we talking about? 911 operators, 311 operators, people that work in permits, staff at rec centers, staff at libraries, inspectors for buildings and businesses, animal control, payroll and procurement, bill payments to vendors would halt, IT. The city would have some real problems there, so they're not messing around. If you'd like to show your support or learn more, you can check out edmontonforeveryone.ca. This message is presented by Civic Service Union, CSU 52. Our friends at Friesen Brothers want to remind you that they've got specials going on all through the month of February to show their support for Heart Month. Friesen Brothers is proud to partner with the University Hospital Foundation, fundraising for the Mazankowski Alberta Heart Institute. We call it the Maz. Friesen Brothers very pleased to provide all their communities with chances to pursue healthy eating habits, a wide range of heart-healthy choices through the store, fruits and veg, lean meats, fresh fish, nutritious grains, and of course the meals prepared by their Red Seal chefs as well. You can check it all out in their flyer. Look for the Heart Month icon through the February flyer at friesen.com/Heart Month. If you're thinking of getting shovels in the ground, having your yard transformed this spring so it's ready to entertain this summer, maybe it's a big anniversary, graduation party, maybe you've got somebody's big birthday coming up and you'd love that outdoor kitchen ready to go, maybe a water feature, a beautiful pergola with some custom stonework. Hey, you don't want to leave this job to just anybody. Go with someone you can trust. We recommend Eden Landscaping. There's an advantage to planning during the off season, and it's more than just being shovel ready for spring. You ensure your spot early to make sure there's a timely and efficient transition of your landscape. Plus, if the supply chain factors in, you're going to make sure you have their materials there when you're ready to start the job. You can find Eden Landscaping online at landscapeedmonton.ca. Interesting tweet from Charles Adler over the weekend, our guest joining us the first episode of every week. He says, so when I hear Pierre Poilievre go on about Canadians who can't afford to feed and house themselves, you say it reminds me of every religious hustler I've ever met, enriching themselves by claiming they care deeply about the poor, just like the slumlords. They cared most about exploiting them. Pretty strong words. You're suggesting that the leader of the opposition, the man that would be prime minister, doesn't give a rip about the millions of Canadians he's trying to reach.
Before we do anything else, I just want you to know that although the Conservatives think of me as a flaming socialist and all that, I support the Canadians' dairy industry, okay? There you go. And
you got to tell people on the podcast you're crushing chocolate milk right out of the 1 liter carton. It's kind of becoming your thing on Real Talk.
It is my real thing on Real Talk, and it's always happening in the second half of our game. I pick up the chocolate milk and take off the glasses. This has become a bit of a tradition.
You know what I'm thinking? Hang on a second, because the Jespersons have very, very deep roots in dairy.
Yes.
We've been dairy farming we're part of the dairy cartel. I don't benefit or profit from this, but my cousins sure do. And anytime that supply management comes up on the show, I'm going to get some texts from my cousins for sure. I'm thinking we get Charles Adler's weekly segment sponsored by either Alberta Milk or maybe the Canadian Milk Lobby. And in the face of all of this, the oat milk and the almond milk and what are all the other milks, Johnny? There's like all these different kinds of milks.
You got coconut you've got
milk,
everything,
you got all
now.
kinds of milks.
Oat?
It could be Real Talk, real milk, and we could just get you to crush crush cow's milk through every interview. Yeah. I like that.
My vegan friends will shun me, but hey, listen, I've lost a lot of business with a lot of people over the years who feel that if you're not 100% with them, and this is what I love about Canada. In my Canada, you don't have to be 100% for anything. You can, life is a schmorg. In a free country, you should be free. If you want to drink real milk, fine. You want to drink some real milk and oat milk or oat beverage or whatever it's called.
We have both in our fridge. We have both. Yeah. Sometimes we have 3 different types, John. Are you an oat milk guy, an almond milk guy, and any milk guy?
We're doing the oat a lot right now because the oat, like a lot of these milks, they seem a little healthier, but they've still got a lot of ingredients, a lot of stuff they add to it. But oat milk is the one we're doing one right now. I think it's got 4 ingredients only. We're trying to keep it like that.
There you go, Chuck. So your take on Poilievre, you're essentially blasting it out there to your 75,000 followers that you don't think he cares about them at all.
Well, my problem is age. I've seen all these things over the years, and obviously the Conservative Party was my home. But beyond that, hosting all the shows that I did, generally had an NDP at the table and a Conservative and a Liberal, and it was very rare that the Conservative at the table didn't see the NDP or the Liberal talking about poverty as a socialist hustler, as a left-winger, as an arch left-winger. I mean, it was very rare that the Conservative would see. And so I find it really hard to believe that Poilievre gets just the real Pierre Poilievre, forget the politician, that the real Poilievre gets out of bed every morning wondering what he can do to help people who end up at food banks. It's strange credulity, to be polite about it. I just don't believe that's really where his heart is. And if people want to believe that Pierre Poilievre is out to wipe out poverty, that's really one of his missions in life, it's fine. Once again, it's a free country. You can believe that. But based on my experience of the Pierre Poilievres of this world and the people who are with Pierre Poilievre, the team is at work. I know the team. No, I don't think poverty is their thing. And when I do hear them go on and on about the food banks, I mean, it does remind me of all of the religious hustlers who, yes, also wanted to do business with me, especially in the United States, who always led with this idea of what they were really about was helping the poor. They weren't about raising multi-millions of dollars for their huge churches and the ministry doing radio, television, websites, you name it. They really weren't into enriching themselves. They were into feeding the hungry.
Andrew Coyne had something on this. I'll show you in just a second. But just on the milk front, Kimberly has corrected us in the live chat. Obviously, she gets 2 points today. She says, what about the OG, like the original soy milk? Obviously, sorry, forgot soy milk there. And Tony quite rightfully says, if it doesn't have nipples, it ain't milk. Oh, so fair enough. I don't know if there's nipples on coconuts. I don't think so. I think
milk is just a word for,
yeah. So Andrew Coyne, you're like, we just can't move right on. Yeah, we just land on the nipples for a second and then touch on, and we're going to leave it there. Pierre Poilievre on February 18th tweets Trudeau's radical environment minister's decision. You look at Stephen Guilbeault, the environment minister, arguably more of a target of Tucker Carlson's during his Alberta stops, during his speech in Alberta. He talked more about Guilbeault and Freeland, I think, combined than he did about Trudeau. But Poilievre tweets that the radical environment minister's decision to end road building is part of a plan to deindustrialize and make us reliant on foreign dictatorships to sell us the things our government bans us from making at home. It prompts Andrew Coyne. I think it's fair to call Coyne a conservative, Charles, who tweets, attention, rubes. He says, used conspiracy theories on sale now. All makes, all models, just send money. Yeah. So I guess Poilievre's lost Andrew Coyne.
Well, I was on a show last week, and I was asked about Guilbeault, and I said that Stephen Guilbeault is Santa Claus for Pierre Poilievre every day. Even if Poilievre didn't have any brains or didn't have any personality, all he'd have to do is quote Guilbeault every week, because Guilbeault is a great gift to the Conservatives. Guilbeault is a former Greenpeace activist, and I guess he's excellent at activism. He's terrible at retail politics. He's terrible at being a minister, and when he throws stuff out about the government will not build roads, well, we know that's full of crap. no matter who's in power, liberals or conservatives federally, and federally that's the way it works. Only liberals or conservatives, with all due respect to my friends in the NDP. The NDP has never formed a government in Ottawa. And so it doesn't matter. I mean, can you find me a politician that doesn't love to build roads and cut the ribbons on roads? I mean, it's a vote getter every single time. But anyway, Guilbeault mentioned this, and I just felt that all this stuff about, well, he's cleaning it up. Well, I'm sorry, there aren't enough Zambonis in the country to clean up after Guilbeault.
Nice.
And I don't know why he still has a job as a cabinet minister, because there is not a single liberal I know. I know liberals, I know conservatives, I know NDPers. There's not a single liberal I know that thinks the government should commit itself to not building any more roads.
Yeah, I mean, I guess probably his CV is what got him the job as environment minister, and I think he's perceived internationally as somebody who takes it very seriously. But at home, but again, listen, what's my frame of reference? Like I mentioned, I was down in Calgary yesterday, caught up with some dear friends. Saw my buddy's dad, who I haven't seen in several years. Love this guy. This guy's known me since I was a little gaffer, and so we sit down and we're having a quick drink after some skating on the ODR, and talk goes to Steven Guilbeault in the first 45 seconds. But this is Alberta. I'm down in Calgary. Steven Guilbeault's never the sort of one favor in Calgary. I don't know how they perceive Steven Guilbeault on Vancouver Island.
I'm from Quebec. Okay, I'm from Quebec. I'm not gonna start speaking French on an English speaking show. Okay, but if I were speaking in French in Quebec,
please do.
I would be 10 times more rancid. Okay, 10 times more in your grill than just saying there aren't enough Zambonis in Canada, or if I were in Quebec, there aren't enough Zambonis in Quebec to clean up after Guilbeault. Okay, I'd remove his teeth on French radio, where you're allowed to be a lot more acerbic than you are in English-speaking radio. If you think that Quebecers don't like the idea of building roads, if you think Quebecers don't like to drive cars and trucks, I mean, I'm sorry, you can say a lot of things about Quebec, but please don't sell me the moonshine that every Quebecer is green and every Quebecer is in love with Steven Guilbeault's ideology. Not true.
So we have a big announcement to make, Chuck, and you can put Charles on screen. I always like to see the reactions to this. So I want to give you an assignment here on the fly. Tomorrow, which is obviously for those that we never know when folks are listening, this will be Wednesday, February 21st. The 21st of February, Real Talk will go one-on-one with the Prime Minister of Canada, with Justin Trudeau. That's tomorrow. Now, he's going to be making a big announcement, and we're going to be talking about that announcement. We're going to have a limited time with him. I'm going to get in as many questions as I can. If you were sitting down with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tomorrow, what is one question that you would be absolutely certain to ask him? What is the one thing that Charles Adler cares more about getting an answer to from the PM than anything else?
My one question would be, I know that you treasure Canadian democracy. What is it about saving Canadian democracy that Justin Trudeau can do next year that no other Liberal could do as well?
There you go. I'm going to fit that in, obviously, because the leadership question is a big one. We're obviously going to ask about the carbon tax. We're obviously going to ask about a couple of other things. Real Talkers, we'll put it out to you as well. We always invite your feedback to talk@ryanjesperson.com. That's the easiest way to get our attention and to make sure that your message lands in our inbox, where one member of our team is guaranteed to see it. Again, that's talk@ryanjesperson.com. And don't miss Justin Trudeau Wednesday. That's February 21st, right here only on Real Talk. Raki Pancholi, one of three candidates to throw her hat in the ring for leadership of the Alberta NDP. We expect that there will probably be more, but to this point, there's three. There's her, Kathleen Ganley, and then, of course, Sarah Hoffman. All three have spoken with us on Real Talk. Raki Pancholi probably making the biggest waves thus far, Chuck, I would say. She was the first to suggest that the carbon tax has lost public confidence. Alberta needs to move on, she thinks, from a consumer carbon tax. And then by way of a news release late last week. She suggests that the Alberta NDP, my words not hers, should consider divorcing the federal party. She quite rightfully suggests that this has been a barrier to entry for a lot of people that in Alberta may support the NDP but can't bring themselves to do it federally. I think it's a really smart move. I think that it's going to rattle a few cages. I think that the support she may lose is the support she probably doesn't have, which is the old guard establishment support that will likely support the other two candidates. You think it's a smart move?
I think it's beyond smart. I think it's a brilliant move. I have said that her staff is brilliant, and she is brilliant to have that staff that put together the launch video. I thought it was tremendous. It wasn't left-wing, it wasn't right-wing, it was Alberta, a love of Alberta, but beyond just a love of Alberta, a love of the opportunities that are created and can be created in Alberta with her fulsome enthusiasm. I thought that video was incredibly inspiring. I've watched it several times. And I think this is also inspiring, this business of separating the Alberta NDP from the federal NDP, this idea that if you want to fight the UCP provincially, then you have to be not just provincial NDP, but you have to be federal NDP makes absolutely no sense to me. It makes a lot of sense if you're Pancholi to let people know that you want to govern someday from the center, because that's the hardest mountain for the NDP to climb. They are perceived as out there on the left, and they are to the left of where most people are comfortable, and not just in rural Alberta. We know that rural Alberta is a conservative monopoly, but you still have to do well in medium-sized towns, and you obviously still have to do well in great big chunks of Calgary. So moving to the center is the smart move for anybody who wants to govern in Alberta, for anyone who's serious about government, not just having a cause, all right? And if Pancholi is serious about becoming a premier in Alberta, I think this sets her up for getting her message beyond the usual NDP territories. Now, I have no idea what the overall membership is like in the NDP. I have no idea how sacred this is to be a member of both the Alberta NDP and the federal NDP. I'm just not NDP enough to understand that. You know, I'm someone who favors the center, and I favor parties that are moving to the center. My gut tells me that Pancholi is serious about moving to the center, because my gut tells me that Pancholi doesn't just want to be the leader of a cause. I think she wants to be the next premier of Alberta.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's there's obviously lots of race to go, and we'll see how the dynamic changes. And obviously lots will happen between now and the middle to the end of June. But you look at I mean, we were just talking about Pierre Poilievre 10 minutes ago. And what was the one thing that I noted when I take a look at the impact that he's having? It's like membership sales, fundraising. And so if Pancholi can do that, like the whole, you're not NDP enough thing, that to me, that's you're her target audience, right? What leader is going to roll in and not put their own stamp on a party, right? That's the whole point.
Yeah. People perceive me to be this enemy of the UCP. If the UCP had a more mainstream leader in the last go, I don't think you would have seen me as an enemy of the UCP. I just don't want to. I don't want to vote for David Parker, and I don't want to vote for a David Parker surrogate. I don't want to vote for the Tony Bennett version of David Parker. But the idea that I'm an NDPer is ridiculous. However, if it's David Parker versus a centrist NDPer, I guess I'm comfortable, as much as it feels weird for me to say this, in that scenario, I'd be comfortable voting for the NDP.
Yeah. Dwayne on here says the NDP is the closest thing to Peter Lougheed's Alberta PCs. What? All in caps. I guess when I quote what in our live chat, it should be what, because it's all caps. Says provincial and federal NDP are very different. I mean, tell that to the critics. You also have to recognize, Chuck, like there's certain non-members you're trying to reach in a leadership race, and then there's some that are just, I mean, you'd never call them lost causes, but they're not your target audience, right? Like sort of the flat earth, anti-mask, hardcore, ardent, take back Alberta crew. The Racky Pancholi's not going to, nor Sarah Hoffman, nor Kathleen Ganley try to reach them. They're trying to reach the people that remember Peter Lougheed, or the people that understand that Alberta's population is growing and is diverse, and that the political parties need to grow with them and better reflect the population. That's your target.
Well, in the days, when I spoke language that today, just dates me, so it's useless for a lot of people under 45. But I used to call myself a Peter Lougheed and Bill Davis conservative. These people were both people of the center. They were both very articulate, and neither of them, and I'll repeat this again and again and again, neither of them saw compromise as the enemy. Neither of them saw politics as zero sum, where you've got to smite your opponents, treat them like they're the enemy. They're not real Canadians, or they're not real Albertans. Peter Lougheed and Bill Davis had huge favorables because they never played that game. So no, I definitely see myself as a Peter Lougheed PCer, and if the NDP can be closer to to the Lougheed model than the UCP, then I'm all for them.
Charles Adler joins us the first episode of every week. This week, that's a Tuesday. We'll see you again on Monday, pal. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you.
You can follow Chuck online. Of course, you find him on Twitter at Charles Adler. I saw some folks wondering in the chat, is this Trudeau's debut on Real Talk? It is indeed not. Back on April 20th, 420 of 2021, the Prime Minister made his Real Talk debut. That was my third interview with him. This will be coming up my fourth. I've asked him about cannabis in the past two. In 2015, shortly after he was elected, I said, you've indicated a plan to legalize cannabis. If and when you legalize it, will you smoke it? And he gave me his answer there, which was to deflect. He deflected. He basically gave the I have some friends that smoke, but it's not my thing answer. And then when we interviewed him on April 20th of 2021, and you can find that in our archives, of course. What made that interview, by the way, especially notable is the verdict had just come down. The cop that was convicted of killing George Floyd, the verdict had come down 10 minutes before our interview, so we had an exclusive with the Prime Minister on that. But I asked him about 420. I said, you're the Prime Minister that legalized cannabis. What is 420, sort of what's the context of it now? How would you analyze or evaluate the success or failure of legalization in Canada? And you can check out our archives if you want to see how he answers that one. Kind of a funny moment, actually. So again, that's February 21st. That's Wednesday. The Prime Minister will join us exclusively here on Real Talk. I did see some people in the chat wondering, what about Pierre Poilievre? Would Pierre Poilievre be welcome on the show? Are you kidding me? We've invited Pierre Poilievre on the show multiple times. The door is wide open. We would basically cancel any interview except for the Prime Minister to accommodate Pierre Poilievre. And so obviously his team is aware of that, and we hope to speak with the leader of the official opposition. Of course, the door is open. We welcome those conversations anytime. These conversations don't happen without the support of incredible Real Talk partners like our friends at California Closets. We're into February now. We're almost into March. Don't look now, but spring is knocking. And so there's two things happening. Number one, you got to make good on your plan to declutter this year. Number two, spring cleaning is coming around. Maybe this is the year that you get serious about decluttering and giving yourself back your own space. Whether that means maybe a Murphy bed into the home office to turn it into a guest room and make it more of a functional space, getting all your chargers organized, the junk drawers finally sorted out. Maybe you could use an entertainment center that wows your guests and keeps everything where it should be. Nobody's got better ideas than the design experts at California Closets. You can start that free consultation today at californiaclosets.ca. Our friends at Apex Automation are putting out the word to the talented engineers across the country right now that are looking for a change of pace, maybe looking for a change of scenery. You've got the skill set, but you're just not feeling motivated. You're not feeling like you're reaching your true potential. Apex Automation is hiring electrical engineers, instrumentation engineers, computer science, process, and mechanical engineers, as well as electricians and instrument technicians. You could be working in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan. Heck, you could be working in Texas if that's what would inspire you to reach new heights. They're all about teamwork. You can read more about their corporate culture and what sets apart Apex Automation by visiting the careers link today at apexautomation.ca. At Complete Care Restoration, they want your mind to be at peace no matter what situation you're in. Now, obviously, everybody's hoping that disaster does not strike. But if it does, if wildfire impacts your community, if you experience a burst pipe or maybe a backed up sewage thing, it happens. If you find mold or asbestos, leave it to the talented and certified professionals at Complete Care Restoration. They've been restoring property and rebuilding peace of mind for 25 years, and we recommend them with 2 thumbs up. You can find them online at CompleteCareRestoration.ca. And before we get to a positive reflection, this is an amazing story and absolutely it's unbelievable. I wanted to remind those of you that are thinking about going back to school that you can take all those objections that you have. You're understanding right now that you don't have maybe the time to commit to a regular class itinerary, or maybe it's the commute to a brick and mortar university that's standing in your way. Athabasca University is Canada's open university, and you won't find a better fit if you need to find a solution to some of those barriers that we mentioned. Heck, we haven't even talked about tuition prices. You know, they've got amazing student supports available. Athabasca University is the post-secondary solution for tens of thousands of learners across the country, from maybe small micro courses all the way through to MBAs to doctoral PhD programs. Athabasca University is a fit for so many folks. It's worth 5 minutes of your time to check it out at athabascau.ca. Have you thought about, if you had one question to ask Trudeau, what it might be? I thought Adler's was an interesting one. Goes right to leadership.
Yeah.
You know, we'll touch on that.
I think
is there
today,
something you'd like to pick his brain on?
Yeah, keeping with the theme, I'll ask him what his favorite milk is.
Perfect.
That doesn't have a nipple.
That'll get the show taken seriously for sure. Did you guys have a good family day weekend?
We did.
You feel like you were just, I got to say, when I came in this morning, there was just the amount of energy
I'm
met
back,
me in this room. You're back. You're back on your feet.
I'm not going to lie. There's kind of a cold and a flu going around right now. It's not COVID. I tested a bunch of times, but last week I was a little under the weather, so I took the weekend to rest and relax and treated it like I was 25 again in the nightclubs when I used to come home at 5 a.m. and sleep till 4:30 p.m. I got about one day I almost got to about 10 hours sleep, Ryan, which is that's a landmark for the last 2 years. But yeah, I'm 100% now. How was yours?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Yeah, just relaxed, did some skating, got out there. It was awesome.
Beautiful.
Awesome to take some time and actually like do what the stats suggests you should do. Like, you know, on Remembrance Day, when you know, some of your buddies are like, what are you doing for Remembrance Day? They're like, I'm going to get the drywalling done. It's like, well, you know, like maybe we should just participate in some remembrance. It's like on Family Day. Kind of felt like we've got to make sure we spend some time with our family.
Of course.
I've got like a real sort of like something that annoys me a little bit. And Bushwriter pops this into our YouTube live chat, says, Pierre Poilievre has 401,000 YouTube subscribers, but who's counting, right? 401,000. Why would he come on this channel? What an interesting bit of logic there. Like, why would a politician make themselves available to address an audience and discuss, you know, issues that impact Canadians in a province that, you know, typically is obviously pretty keen to hear from him? Why would he possibly do that? I hope that our attitudes haven't gotten to that point where it's just clout, where it's like, because a politician has built up their own following on social media, they don't participate in debate, or they don't participate in interviews, or they don't make themselves available to reach people that they might not otherwise reach. They don't, you know, put themselves up for an exchange of ideas that could inspire the electorate or get people thinking about political priorities. I hope we've not gotten to that point where we're just counting like who has more YouTube subscribers, because if that's the case, then Trudeau's got the bigger flex on Poilievre. I mean, if we're going to start acting like we're on the playground and we're going to start counting like Twitter followers and like who deserves to talk to who, Trudeau's numbers dwarf Poilievre's. Now, of course, you could rightfully invoke polling, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But I would love an opportunity to chat with Pierre Poilievre. Some of you are saying, well, maybe he'll do it closer to the election. I hope so. The door is always open. I mean, if this show is anything, it's a show where ideas can be debated and discussed, where you're going to hear from people from across the political spectrum and otherwise, and hear different opinions as you form your own. And we love feedback from people that indicate, and don't think that we haven't noticed a whole bunch of new names in the chat, a whole bunch of new names in our email inbox. It's really exciting. It's encouraging. Make sure you tell your friends as well. If you found this talk show and you found something that maybe wasn't on your radar before, which was an exchange of ideas in a respectful, reputable fashion, then we'd love if you'd share it with others. You can, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit follow when you find our podcast, and when you like and share our content, we really appreciate it. As we wrap up the first episode of every week, we understand for some people, you're coming back from the long weekend, you're kind of feeling like you got a case of the Mondays on a Tuesday. Our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy, they're all about turning that trend around. And that's why every week, the first episode, they give us a chance to say no to negativity, to harness positive energy and renew our faith in humanity. It's Kubi Renewable Energy presenting Positive Reflections, and we absolutely love this story out of the Fort Worth Zoo in Texas. I'm going to tell you the details for those of us on the podcast, but Johnny's got a few photos that are going to blow your mind. So, human doctors stepping in to perform a rare emergency C-section on a gorilla mom. A gorilla! She went into labor 5 weeks early, and this kind of shows out of this Fort Worth Zoo in Texas. This is Sakani. Sakani is the mama, was showing signs of a pregnancy complication. It's called pre-eclampsia, but I don't know anything about it, Johnny. But basically, the zookeepers called in a team of gynecologists, that have human patients, okay? Yeah. They usually spend their time looking after humans to assist with this urgent delivery, and they determined as they arrived at the zoo that if it was a human woman in the same condition, if they wanted to save the life of both the infant and the mom, it required an emergency C-section. And so these human doctors, working alongside veterinarians, obviously, performed this operation 5 weeks before term. They said many of them, including Dr. Jamie Walker-Irwin, who led the surgery with Dr. Robert Ersprung and Dr. Dennis Okigrosso, none of them had ever worked with primates or apes before. This was a first, but they said that this was easily, I'm getting chills talking about this, the highlight of their careers, like with apologies to all the humans they've helped. They named they named this beautiful baby Jamilia, which means beautiful in Swahili. It didn't hurt that one of the doctors' names was Jamie as well. This is the third gorilla birth in the zoo's 115-year history. Just the third birth and the first to be born via cesarean section. Unbelievable. They say now out of the Fort Worth Zoo that the beautiful baby and mama are are basically recovering well. And they say that there are some challenges, like mama's having a bit of a tough time reconnecting with baby, but they say that the outlook is completely positive and they expect this beautiful baby gorilla born in Fort Worth to live a long and happy life. Beautiful. Absolutely love that story. We hope that it brought as much of a smile to your face as it did to ours. If you have a positive reflection, this could be something somebody said to you, a random act of kindness, a pay it forward story. Send it to us, talk@ryanjesperson.com. You could see it featured in a future episode of Real Talk presented by our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy. You can get a free solar quote today at kubienergy.ca. As mentioned, we'll be going one-on-one with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. That's tomorrow. That'll be Wednesday, February 21st. Stay tuned to our social media channels for updates on that interview. And thanks for making this episode of Real Talk part of your day. We'll talk to you soon.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer.